This is Old Fort Park. It's located in Fort Pierce, Florida. We're going to see an Indian mound and a Second Seminole War fort. So come join us.
Most prominently, this park contains an 18-foot-tall burial mound constructed by the native Eyes Indian tribe over a period of several centuries, dating to 1000 to 1500 AD. These are illustrations of some of the prehistoric technology of the Eyes Indians. The Eyes were one of the most powerful tribes in Florida, numbering several 100,000 and occupying territory spanning from Cape Canaveral to the north to the Jupiter Inlet to the south. The Eyes hunted deer and bear, gathered sea grapes, cocoa plums, sea oats, and sable palm berries, caught sea turtles and shellfish, fished a variety of fish from the Indian Lagoon, collected oysters, and were largely dependent on the waters of the Indian River and Atlantic Ocean for sustenance. The Eyes built huts of wood and palm fronds, traveled the waterways in pine or cypress dugout canoes, and fashioned fish hooks using toe bones of deer. The Eyes used wooden spears with spear tips made of fossilized coral and fish bone, and may have utilized the atlatl, a spear-throwing shaft. By 1740, the Eyes had largely disappeared, with many dying of European-born diseases or sold into slavery to Caribbean sugar plantations by the Spanish and English, and others defeated by northern Indian tribes. The site once featured a natural spring, which provided fresh water for the Eyes for centuries, and eventually lured Spanish sailors here to acquire fresh water for their water jars as they prepared for their transatlantic crossing back to Spain during the period of 1550 to 1750.
So we're going to climb the steps to the top of the Indian mound.
The mound also served as a location of Fort Pierce, a military installation utilized by the U.S. Army from 1838 to 1842 for the purpose of being a main supply depot for the Army during the Second Seminole War. On New Year's Day, 1838, a regiment of American soldiers cleared a place for their new fort on this Indian burial mound on the western shore of the Indian River and built a blockhouse out of sable palm logs for shelter and protection. The next day, on January 2nd, 1838, the outpost became active. This is a nice gumbo limbo tree at the top of the mound. The fort was named after the commanding officer, Brevet Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin K. Pierce, who was the brother of future U.S. President Franklin Pierce. The fort was an important component of General Thomas Jessup's winter campaign against the Seminoles in 1837 to 1838. Fort Pierce briefly served as the U.S. Army of the South headquarters when General Jessup arrived with his staff and a force of 1,000 troops, including the 2nd U.S. Dragoons Regiment and the Alabama and Tennessee Mounted Volunteers, on January 14, 1838. William T. Sherman, who would go on to become one of the Union Army's most successful generals during the Civil War, was stationed at the fort as a young second lieutenant. Coacucci, also known as Wildcat, one of the most feared Seminole warriors, arranged his surrender at Fort Pierce to a group of mounted soldiers under the command of Lieutenant William T. Sherman. Wildcat was transported to Indian Territory in Oklahoma and later migrated to Mexico, where he died. Despite being a strategic supply base, the post was deactivated in February 1842 at the end of the Second Seminole War, without ever engaging in a battle. The fort burned down in December 1843. The Fort Pierce Monument was erected on July 4, 1925, to commemorate the site of Fort Pierce.
If you enjoyed this visit to Old Fort Park and Fort Pierce, please click like, subscribe to our channel, and we will see you on our next adventure.